My wife's cruel laugh shattered my identity, so I built a covert escape plan that exposed her control and claimed back power freedom once claimed. That moment crystallized everything wrong with our 5-year marriage. Her words weren't a plea for me to stay. They were a statement of ownership. For years, I had been slowly disappearing. What started as a whirlwind romance quickly transformed into something unrecognizable. The woman who once claimed to love everything about me now criticized my every move. My friends became bad influences. My hobbies were wastes of time. My career ambitions were unrealistic. Bit by bit, she had isolated me from everything and everyone I cared about. That evening began like countless others before it. I returned home after a 12-hour workday to find her scrolling through my phone messages. When I objected, she exploded, accusing me of hiding something. The argument escalated until I finally said the words that had been building inside me for months. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. That's when she laughed. Not a nervous laugh or even an angry one. It was the confident laugh of someone who believed they held all the power. "You won't leave me," she repeated, setting my phone down. "Where would you go? Who would even take you in? Your friends don't care about you anymore. Your family thinks you're pathetic. You've got nothing without me." The worst part wasn't her words, but the realization that she believed them completely. In her mind, I was trapped. She had engineered my dependence so thoroughly that my leaving wasn't even a possibility worth considering. Looking into her eyes, I saw no love, only satisfaction at having someone so completely under control. Later that night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above our bed. Each rotation seemed to mock the circular pattern of our relationship, the fights, hollow apologies, brief reconciliations, and inevitable return to tension. I had become a ghost in my own life, haunting the margins of a story controlled by someone else. What terrified me most in that moment wasn't the prospect of leaving, but the possibility that she might be right. Had I become so diminished that I couldn't exist independently anymore? The thought sent a cold shiver through me, colder than any winter wind I'd ever felt. But something else happened that night as I lay awake. With each passing hour, her laughter echoed less in my mind, replaced instead by a growing spark of determination. I thought about the man I used to be before this relationship, confident, ambitious, surrounded by friends who valued me. That version of myself wasn't completely gone. He was just buried, waiting to re-emerge. By morning, something had fundamentally changed. I moved through our morning routine on autopilot, making coffee, preparing breakfast, nodding at her instructions for the day. But internally, I had crossed an invisible line. Her laughter had not weakened my resolve. It had crystallized it. As I walked out the door for work, I took one last look at the woman who thought she owned me. She had no idea that her mocking laughter had just set in motion exactly what she thought impossible. I would leave, but I wouldn't just disappear. I would reclaim everything she had taken from me, and more. This wasn't going to be a simple walkout fueled by emotion. That approach would fail. She'd find a way to pull me back into her orbit. No, this required strategy, patience, and a meticulousness that matched her own manipulative planning. She had spent years building this cage around me. I would need to dismantle it carefully without alerting the captor until I was already free. That day at work, instead of burying myself in projects to avoid thinking about my home situation, I opened a new document on my computer. At the top, I typed 3 words that would become my guiding principle in the coming weeks: strategic exit plan. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in deception, not from her, but from me. I began documenting everything, each controlling text message, every manipulative comment, all financial transactions she made without my knowledge. I installed a discreet recording app on my phone and captured her verbal assaults. What she didn't realize was that while she thought I remained under her thumb, I was methodically building my case and preparing my escape. During lunch breaks, I met with a divorce attorney who specialized in cases involving manipulative partners. The consultation was eye-opening. "What you're describing is financial and emotional abuse," he said bluntly. "And based on what you've shared, you've got a strong case to protect your assets." He advised me to gather evidence without tipping my hand, advice I was already following. That same week, I opened a new bank account at a different institution. Each day, I transferred small amounts from our joint account, nothing large enough to raise suspicion, but enough to gradually build a financial cushion. I secured a separate credit card that wouldn't appear on our shared statements. I even found a furnished apartment across town, paying the deposit in cash. The digital world required careful navigation. I created new email accounts and changed passwords on my primary ones. I purchased a prepaid phone that became my real communication line with the attorney and a few trusted contacts. The phone she monitored now served as a decoy, showing only mundane, expected conversations. What surprised me most during this time was discovering how much she had isolated me from reality. Reaching out to an old college friend revealed that she had been spreading lies about me for years. "She told everyone you had anger issues and didn't want visitors," he explained over coffee. "We tried reaching out multiple times, but she always had some excuse why you couldn't talk." Other friends shared similar stories, each piece adding to the puzzle of my controlled existence. Even more shocking were the financial discoveries. While reviewing our accounts, I found significant withdrawals she'd made over the years, money funneled to accounts I knew nothing about. She had been systematically diverting our shared resources while simultaneously making me feel financially incompetent. Throughout this period, I maintained the facade at home. I arrived when expected, responded to her text promptly, and participated in our routines. When she criticized, I absorbed it without the usual defensive reaction. This subtle change in my behavior seemed to please her, reinforcing her belief in her complete control. The less I resisted, the more her guard lowered. "You seem different lately," she observed one evening, studying me from across the dinner table. "Just tired," I replied, offering the excuse she expected. "Work has been intense." She seemed satisfied with this explanation, never suspecting that my exhaustion stemmed from leading a double life, building my escape route by day, playing the submissive husband by night. The hardest part wasn't the planning or the deception. It was confronting how much of myself I had surrendered. Each night, as I lay beside her pretending to sleep, I wrestled with complicated emotions. There had been good times early on, moments of connection that had kept me invested despite the red flags. Part of me mourned not just the relationship, but the person I had become within it, someone willing to accept scraps of affection in exchange for dignity. As my exit plan took shape, I began reconnecting with my core identity. I joined a gym and started working out during lunch breaks, reclaiming my physical strength that had diminished under the weight of stress. I reconnected with professional contacts, discreetly exploring job opportunities that would give me more financial stability post-separation. By the third week, my preparation was nearly complete. The apartment was secured. Key documents were safely removed from our home. My essential belongings were gradually relocated under the guise of donating old things or organizing the storage unit. The new bank account contained enough to sustain me for 3 months. The divorce papers were drawn up, awaiting only my final decision on timing. Looking back, I realized her confident laugh that night had been the key that unlocked my prison door. Her absolute certainty in my inability to leave revealed the full extent of her delusion. She had manufactured a helpless version of me that existed only in her mind. Now, as I finalized my preparations, I understood the poetic justice that was coming. Her greatest weapon against me, the belief that I was nothing without her, had become the perfect cover for my escape. The execution phase of my plan began with subtle shifts in our power dynamic. I started saying no to small things, declining to run errands that interrupted my workday, questioning suspicious expenses on our shared accounts. Each minor act of defiance was a test, measuring both her reaction and my resolve. Her responses ranged from confusion to irritation, but importantly, she didn't yet sense the larger rebellion brewing. One Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work and instead met with my attorney to finalize the divorce filing. The papers wouldn't be served immediately. That would come later at a strategically chosen moment. For now, they waited in my lawyer's office, a loaded weapon ready to be deployed. That same day, I completed the transfer of my portion of our joint investments into accounts solely in my name. The transaction was perfectly legal, as my attorney had confirmed, but I knew it would be the first major shock to her system when discovered. That evening, she noticed something different about me. "You seem, I don't know, distant," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied my face across the dinner table. "Just tired," I replied with the same excuse I'd been using for weeks. But this time, I held her gaze without the usual apologetic look. A fleeting expression of uncertainty crossed her face, the first crack in her confident facade. The next phase involved reclaiming social connections. I reached out to family members and friends who had been pushed to the periphery of my life. These conversations were often difficult, requiring explanations without revealing my full plan. "Things haven't been what they seemed," I told my brother during a lunch meeting. I've been controlled in ways I'm only now recognizing. His shocked expression confirmed what I already knew. My marriage looked very different from the outside than it felt from within. Week by week, I expanded my independence. I declined her suggestions about my clothing choices. I stopped asking permission to make basic decisions. I stayed late at work without offering elaborate explanations. Each act was a small reclamation of autonomy that she had systematically stripped away over the years. The most calculated move came when I reconnected with a college friend who owned a successful tech company. During our catch-up, I mentioned some innovative solutions I'd developed at my current job. 2 days later, he called with a job offer, higher salary, better benefits, and most importantly, a fresh start in a different city. I accepted immediately but kept the information to myself, another card held close to my chest for the right moment. As these changes accumulated, her behavior began to shift. The confident control artist was giving way to someone increasingly anxious and suspicious. She checked my location more frequently. Her questions became more probing. The emotional manipulation intensified, alternating between guilt trips, affection, and explosive anger, sometimes within the same hour. These were the desperate tactics of someone sensing they were losing their grip. The turning point came unexpectedly. While I was showering, she broke into my secondary email account, when I had intentionally left it with minimal security as a decoy. There, she found correspondence with the apartment manager about the new lease. When I emerged from the bathroom, she stood in the bedroom, phone in hand, face contorted with rage. "What is this?" she demanded, thrusting the screen toward me. "You're planning to leave after everything I've done for you?" Rather than denying or explaining, I simply looked at her and said, "Yes." The simplicity of my response seemed to knock her off balance. She had prepared for denials, for apologies, for the usual pattern of me backing down. My calm confirmation disrupted her script entirely. "You can't," she sputtered, shifting tactics immediately. "You won't survive out there. You'll be back in a week, begging me to take you back." I dressed slowly, deliberately, maintaining silence as she cycled through anger, dismissal, and finally a performance of wounded vulnerability. "I thought we were happy," she said, tears suddenly appearing. "I've given you everything." "Actually," I replied, "you've taken everything, and now I'm taking it back." That night was a psychological warfare battlefield. She threatened, pleaded, raged, and wept, all tools that had worked effectively in the past. But something fundamental had changed. With each escalating tactic, I saw not the all-powerful figure who had dominated my life, but a manipulator whose only real power came from my willingness to surrender it. I slept in the guest room, door locked, listening to her alternate between crying loudly enough for me to hear and trying to pick the lock. By morning, exhaustion had replaced her fury. She approached me in the kitchen with red-rimmed eyes and a new strategy. "We can work through this," she said softly. "Couples have rough patches. We just need counseling." I poured my coffee and looked at her directly. "The lease starts next week. I'll be gone by Friday." The walls she had built around me were crumbling, and for the first time in years, I breathed the fresh air of approaching freedom. She didn't know about the job offer, the completed divorce papers, or the evidence I had compiled. She was still fighting the last battle, unaware that the war was already over. The following days unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. She vacillated between tactics, sometimes playing the victim, other times the vengeful aggressor. When emotional manipulation failed, she tried financial intimidation. "You'll get nothing," she hissed during breakfast. "I've always handled our money. You don't even know what you're walking away from." Her statement couldn't have provided a better opening. "Actually," I replied calmly, sliding a folder across the table, "I know exactly what I'm walking away from." Inside were printouts detailing every hidden account she'd created, every unauthorized transfer she'd made, and every asset she'd attempted to conceal. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the pages. "How did you—" "You were so convinced of my incompetence that you got sloppy," I explained, sipping my coffee with a steadiness that surprised even me. "Those accounts are frozen now, by the way. My attorney filed the paperwork yesterday." This revelation marked the beginning of the end game. With her financial secrecy exposed, she switched to threatening my reputation. "I'll tell everyone what you're really like," she warned. "No one will believe your version." That evening, I received a flurry of concerned messages from mutual friends. She'd started her campaign, painting me as unstable and potentially dangerous. What she didn't anticipate was my preparedness. I responded not with angry denials, but with selective evidence. Screenshots of her threatening texts, recordings of her verbal abuse, and testimonials from friends who had witnessed her manipulation firsthand. I never wanted to expose this publicly. I told each person who reached out, but I won't let her continue controlling the narrative. Within 24 hours, the tide of sympathy had shifted dramatically. Thursday arrived, one day before my planned departure. I returned from work to find her in a state I'd never witnessed before. Gone was the confident manipulator. In her place sat someone frantic, almost unhinged. She had discovered the accepted job offer while searching through my belongings. "Another city," she screamed, waving the offer letter. "You're not just leaving me, you're disappearing completely." "Yes," I answered, maintaining the composure that had become my shield. "The movers come tomorrow." She lunged then, not at me, but at the nearest shelf, sending framed photos and mementos crashing to the floor. "You think you've figured everything out?" she shouted over the sound of breaking glass. "You've planned your perfect escape." I watched her destruction without emotion, seeing it for what it truly was, the last desperate act of someone who controlled others through chaos and fear. When she finally exhausted herself, standing amid the wreckage of our shared possessions, I simply said, "I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow." Her response came in a whisper so chilling it nearly broke my newfound resolve. "You might leave, but you'll never be free of me." That night, in the sterile safety of a hotel room, her words echoed in my mind. Was there truth in her threat? Had she embedded herself so deeply in my psyche that complete freedom was impossible? The doubt crept in, familiar and almost comfortable after years of conditioning. Morning brought clarity with the sunrise. I realized her final threat was just another control tactic, one that only worked if I believed it. Freedom wasn't just physical distance. It was reclaiming the mental space she had occupied for too long. I arrived at our house precisely at 10 a.m., when I knew she would be meeting with her personal trainer, another controlled environment where she showcased her superiority. The moving team worked efficiently, loading only the items I had specifically listed, nothing more, nothing less. I left behind the expensive furniture she had selected without my input, the artwork that reflected only her taste, the kitchen gadgets that had become weapons in her criticisms of my cooking. These weren't concessions. They were deliberate abandonments of the props in her performance of control. As the last box was loaded, I toured the half-empty house one final time. In the bedroom, I placed an envelope on her pillow containing just 3 items, my house key, my wedding ring, and a note with a single sentence. "You were wrong. I did leave." The process server arrived just as the moving truck pulled away, timing orchestrated by my attorney to ensure maximum impact. From my car, I watched the stranger approach our front door, legal documents in hand that would officially begin the dissolution of our marriage. The moment should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt something unexpected, pity, not for myself, but for her. She had constructed her entire identity around controlling another human being, and that foundation was crumbling beneath her. As I drove away, my phone buzzed repeatedly with her incoming calls. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The woman who had laughed at my threat to leave, who had declared with absolute certainty that I couldn't walk away, was now facing the reality of an empty house and a life unraveling. The interstate highway stretched before me, carrying me toward a new city, a new job, and most importantly, a self I was rediscovering with each mile. Her comfort zone, built on my submission and fear, was now firmly in my rearview mirror, growing smaller by the minute. The first month in my new city passed in a blur of professional orientation and personal rediscovery. My new apartment, though modest compared to our former house, became a sanctuary. Each item within it was chosen by me, positioned according to my preferences, existing without criticism or commentary. The simplicity of these decisions, which coffee maker to buy, where to place a bookshelf, carried a profound freedom that outsiders might find difficult to comprehend. My new position at the tech company provided more than financial independence. It offered intellectual recognition I had been starved of for years. Colleagues valued my input. My supervisor praised my innovative approaches. The constant undercurrent of inadequacy that had become my baseline emotional state gradually receded, replaced by growing confidence in my professional abilities. 3 weeks after my departure, the first indirect report from my former life arrived through a mutual friend who had remained neutral throughout the separation. "She's telling everyone you had a mental breakdown," he informed me during a video call. "Claims you abandoned her without warning and emptied the accounts." This information might have once sent me spiraling into defensive justifications. Instead, I simply asked, "And do people believe her?" His hesitation told me everything. Some did at first, but she's been erratic, contradicting herself, lashing out at anyone who questions her version. People are starting to see what you were dealing with. The divorce proceedings advanced with the expected legal maneuvering. Her initial filing claimed abandonment and financial misconduct. My attorney easily countered with the evidence I had methodically gathered. When confronted with recordings of her verbal abuse and documentation of her financial deceptions, her legal strategy shifted to delay tactics and petty obstruction. During this period, I maintained strict communication discipline. All contact went through attorneys only. I blocked her on social media and filtered her emails directly to a folder my lawyer periodically reviewed. This digital barrier proved crucial when she launched what my attorney called a scorched earth campaign, contacting my employer with false accusations, reaching out to distant acquaintances with fabricated stories, even attempting to access my medical records through manipulation. 6 weeks into my new life, I received an unexpected message from her sister, someone who had witnessed her controlling behavior firsthand, but had always remained cautiously neutral. "The house is a disaster," she wrote. "She's fired the housekeeper, alienated most friends, and seems to be unraveling. Part of me thinks you should know this, though I'm not sure why." I read the message several times, searching for how it made me feel. The answer surprised me. Nothing. Not satisfaction, not concern, not vindication. The information existed as mere facts about a person who no longer occupied space in my emotional landscape. I thanked her sister for reaching out but explained that I was no longer in a position to help. By the 3rd month, professional success had further cemented my new reality. A security software innovation I developed received company-wide recognition, leading to a performance bonus and expanded responsibilities. I joined a local hiking group, gradually building new friendships based on shared interests rather than shared history. I began dating casually, nothing serious but meaningful steps toward trusting human connection again. The contrast between my flourishing new life and reports of her deteriorating situation created a strange cognitive dissonance. According to mutual connections, she had been forced to sell our house, unable to maintain the mortgage payments alone. Her carefully curated social image had fractured as her behavior became increasingly erratic in public settings. The narrative she had constructed about me and about herself was collapsing without my presence to reinforce it. What fascinated me most was how completely her power had depended on my participation. All those years, her strength had derived not from any inherent superiority, but from my willingness to diminish myself. Her comfort zone had been built entirely on my discomfort. By removing myself, I had not just escaped her control, I had dismantled the very foundation of her assumed authority. The divorce was finalized in the 4th month, remarkably quick by typical standards, expedited by her eventual capitulation, when faced with the overwhelming evidence I had compiled. The financial settlement was fair, neither punitive nor overly generous. I wanted nothing more than a clean break, free from any strings that might tether me to that former life. The legal notice of our dissolved marriage arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I signed for the certified letter, opened it at my kitchen table, and felt a profound sense of formal closure. That evening, I hiked to an overlook above the city and watched the sunset paint the skyline in gold and amber. The view was spectacular, but what struck me most was the quality of my solitude, comfortable, peaceful, chosen. My phone buzzed with a text from a colleague inviting me to a weekend gathering. I replied with acceptance, tucking the phone back into my pocket without checking for other notifications. The compulsive habit of constantly monitoring for her messages, explaining my whereabouts, justifying my social interactions, that anxious vigilance had finally faded. Later that night, I removed the last photos of her from my cloud storage, not in anger or resentment, but as part of an ongoing curation of my digital life. As her image disappeared from my screen, I realized the extent of my transformation. The man who had trembled at her laughter, who had believed himself incapable of independence, now existed only in memory. In his place stood someone new yet familiar. The person I was always meant to be, finally embracing the full measure of his worth. 1 year after that pivotal night when her laughter had crystallized my decision to leave, I returned to my former city for a technology conference. The trip wasn't an emotional pilgrimage or a victory lap, simply a professional necessity that happened to bring me back to familiar geography. Still, as the plane descended through cloud cover, revealing the skyline below. I felt a momentary tightness in my chest. This place had been both home and prison. The conference itself proved remarkably successful. My presentation on security innovations drew significant attention, resulting in valuable industry connections and potential partnership opportunities for my company. Colleagues who knew nothing of my personal history saw only a confident professional at the top of his field. This external validation, while no longer necessary for my self-worth, provided satisfying confirmation of how far I'd come. On the final evening, after a dinner with potential investors, I decided to walk back to my hotel rather than take a rideshare. The night was clear, the temperature perfect for exploring streets that once held such complicated emotions. I passed our old neighborhood coffee shop, now under new management. The bookstore where she had once mocked my reading choices had closed entirely. The city had changed in my absence, just as I had changed away from it. Turning a corner near the downtown arts district, I experienced the encounter I had subconsciously both expected and dreaded. She was exiting a restaurant with a small group, laughing too loudly at something someone had said. Even from a distance, I could see the performance quality of her animation, the practiced charm that meant to be charm that had once seemed so genuine to me. For a moment, I considered changing direction, avoiding the potential confrontation. But that impulse felt like a regression to old patterns of avoidance. Instead, I continued walking, my pace neither hurrying nor slowing. If she noticed me, so be it. If not, that was equally acceptable. She saw me when I was about 20 feet away. The recognition flashed across her face in stages: initial confusion, stunned realization, and finally, a calculated shift to casual composure. She excused herself from her companions and stepped directly into my path. "Well," she said, her voice carrying that familiar cadence of controlled emotion. "This is unexpected." "Conference in town," I replied simply, noting with detached curiosity how much smaller she seemed now. Not physically, but in presence. The gravitational pull she had once exerted on my reality had completely dissipated. She studied me with an intensity that once would have made me uncomfortable. "You look different." "I am different," I acknowledged, maintaining comfortable eye contact without the anxious need to please that had once characterized our interactions. An awkward silence stretched between us. Awkward for her, peaceful for me. I watched her mentally cycling through potential conversational strategies, searching for the approach that would give her the upper hand. Finally, she settled on vulnerability. "Things have been difficult since you left," she admitted, her voice softening to the tone she had always used when reeling me back after conflict. "The house, my job, nothing's been the same." "I'm sorry to hear that," I responded. The words were genuine but unburdened by responsibility for her situation. She stepped slightly closer, lowering her voice. "We should grab coffee while you're in town, catch up properly." Her fingers brushed my forearm, a calculated gesture that once would have sent electricity through my body, reactivating old patterns of response. Now it registered as nothing more than incidental physical contact. "I don't think that would be constructive for either of us," I replied, gently stepping back to establish a comfortable boundary. Frustration flickered across her features, quickly masked by a practiced smile. "You're still angry. That's understandable." "I'm not angry," I corrected her, realizing as I spoke that it was absolutely true. "I'm just finished." The statement hung in the air between us, simple yet definitive. Her expression shifted, revealing a momentary glimpse of the raw desperation beneath her composed exterior. She had lost not just me but the power I had given her over my self-perception. No manipulation, no emotional leverage, no carefully crafted vulnerability could rebuild that foundation once it had been completely dismantled. "Your friends are waiting," I observed, nodding toward her companions, who were watching our interaction with undisguised curiosity. "They're business associates," she corrected quickly, the instinct to control information still evident. "My consulting practice is taking off." I smiled genuinely. "I'm glad things are working out professionally." With nothing left to say, I stepped around her and continued my walk toward the hotel. I had gone perhaps 10 steps when her voice called after me. "Do you ever regret it?" Walking away, I turned back, considering her question seriously. She stood alone on the sidewalk, the carefully constructed facade temporarily dropped, asking perhaps the only honest question she had ever posed to me. "No," I answered simply, "not for a moment." As I continued walking, I felt no triumph or vindication, only completion. The chapter that had begun with her derisive laughter had finally closed. In its place existed a life rebuilt on foundations of my own creation, containing challenges and victories that belonged entirely to me. Back in my hotel room, I stood at the window overlooking the city where so much of my identity had been both lost and found. Tomorrow, I would board a plane back to my new home, return to work I found fulfilling, and continue building relationships based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. Her laughter no longer echoed in my mind. The words that had once defined my impossible escape, "You won't leave me," had lost all their power. I had not only left, but had taken with me the lessons that ensured I would never again surrender my autonomy to anyone. The comfort zone I had dismantled was replaced by something infinitely more valuable. A life authentically mine, navigated with hard-won wisdom and genuine self-respect. Our story has come to an end,